Okay, welcome to our main meeting of Braintree Democratic Town Committee. Um, Today we have um, a guest speaker, Ben Downing, who is a candidate for governor. We are going to record so people who missed the meeting can watch later on. So I have done a little reading about Ben, and he was a state senator for 10 years from Western Massachusetts. And he um, left that to work for a renewable energy company, moved to East Boston, and is very active in climate change um, and issues of environmental justice, which are very important to us here in Braintree. So go ahead, Ben, you have the floor.
Sure, and thank you so much, Kathleen. Really do appreciate it, and appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all. I know the last thing anyone wants to see in their email inbox these days is another Zoom invite. So I'm incredibly impressed by the turnout and appreciate you all being here. Like Kathleen said, my name is Ben Downing, and I'm running for governor to build a fairer, stronger Massachusetts. I think it's important to start by recognizing the obvious. This past year has been brutal. We've lost too many friends, family members, and neighbors. And while we're finally starting to see signs of light after so much darkness, it's important to remember we are still hurting. Yes, because of the virus, but also because our leaders didn't prepare us for it. And that left all of us, but particularly the most vulnerable, exposed. If we're going to rebuild from COVID, we need leaders who have learned the lesson behind all that loss and pain. We need to expect more from those who serve us, be honest about how we got here. That's why I'm running for governor. A little bit about me and how I come to this race. I grew up in Pittsfield, a city that struggled and had to fight for itself. I know what it is to get knocked down. My city got knocked down as I was growing up. GE left, took the jobs, and we were left cleaning up and rebuilding. The message kids in our city heard growing up was clear: study hard and get out. I think that story sounds familiar to a lot of folks across the state, from Brockton and Fall River, Springfield, Lawrence, many other communities. My family got knocked down too when my dad and Nate, my little brother, died suddenly from heart disease less than 10 years apart. They were the center of my world. So I also know what it takes to get back up, to grow stronger at those broken places. I know what it is to have your community rally around you and hold you up when you don't know if you could stand without them. Loss shaped the kind of person that I am and the leader I strive to be. It deepened my empathy and fueled my sense of urgency. It pushed me to run for the Senate. I got into a race with a lot of candidates who had longer resumes than me. My campaign was dismissed like young people too often are, until I won by 243 votes. Then I went on to serve the largest Senate district in Massachusetts for 10 years, leading legislative efforts to increase clean energy production, fight poverty and hunger, expand civil rights for transgender residents, and much more. After 5 terms, I kept a promise I had made and term limited myself. I went to work in the private sector building climate change solutions. My wife, Michaela, and I moved to East Boston and started a family. Our sons, Malcolm and Eamon, joined us, and we learned the only thing more renewable than solar energy is a toddler's commitment to terrify and tire their parents every day, every waking hour. Now, East Boston is 150 miles away from Pittsfield, different in a million ways, but similar at the core, and similar to so many other communities across the state. Tough, striving, creative, generous places that have had to fight so much harder than they should to get Beacon Hill to pay attention. And that's why I'm here today, because I have lived and seen the difference that state leadership makes. I know what it feels like to be written off. I know that too many suffer when those in power think they can continuously kick the can down the road. If we're going to build a fairer, stronger Massachusetts, if we're going to recover from this collective trauma and loss, if we're going to become stronger at the broken places together, we need urgency starting with our governor. For the last 6 years, Charlie Baker, with little pushback from Beacon Hill, has squandered the opportunity to address the challenges facing Massachusetts families on climate, on transit, on childcare, on education, on COVID response. He has all of the political capital in the world, but he hasn't spent it on our behalf. We need a governor who sees, who feels, who understands the impacts of economic and racial disparities, the urgency of climate change, the consequences of healthcare inequity. Because someday, and hopefully soon, COVID will be in the past. We're all starting to get our vaccines. I got my second shot this morning. If you haven't signed up, please go out there, sign up, get it done. We're starting to see our friends and our family members again. But we need to remember there are no vaccines for poverty or racism or climate change. We can't go back to the normal that failed to take them on. I'm running because I see these problems. I see the same tired old politics that let them persist. And I refuse to accept that returning to that normal is good enough. I'm running because I believe our potential is limitless. I believe out of this darkness, we can build a better, brighter tomorrow for everyone, everywhere. But we can't do that if returning to normal is our goal. My name is Ben Downey. I'm running for governor to build a fairer, stronger Massachusetts. I look forward to the opportunity to earn your trust. And if I do that, and if I'm lucky enough to do that, I invite you to be a part of this campaign. So I look forward to your questions. I appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening. And much as I look forward to the opportunity to earn your trust, I look forward to the days that we're all going to be able to do this in person very, very soon. Fingers crossed. So thank you all very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you, Ben. That was a good introduction to yourself. And I know some of our members will have questions. So if you have a question, could you raise your hand, use the raise hand feature? The first question comes from Andy Pierce. Andy, will you unmute yourself, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Downing, for being at our meeting tonight. I'd like you to be more specific about the gaps that you would fill in terms of what Governor Baker has done on the issues that you address, and the things that you would do to fill those gaps.
Yep. Really appreciate the questions, Andy. And I'll start with a couple of specific examples from the initial policy plans that the campaign has rolled out already. And I will make sure to drop links to those plans into the chat and share them with folks as well. So the first policy plan that we rolled out was our climate plan. And on that front, I think there are several concrete steps that we should have taken already. First, Massachusetts should be one of the already dozen states that have a commitment to get to 100% clean electricity and clean energy. I have that specifically in my plan. I've worked on these issues in the state Senate. I've worked on them in the private sector for the last 4 years. I know we have the technology and the solutions to do the work. And I'm excited to talk more in detail about that plan. But that's one specific step that we could take. Even under the next gen roadmap legislation that was important to get put into law, we could be to 2050 and still have fossil fuels operating in Massachusetts. I think the climate science demands that we do more and do better there. Another point within climate policy in particular is there is no specific commitment to benefits and investments in environmental justice communities under Massachusetts law. We just got the first clear description of those communities in the Next Gen Roadmap. States like New York have made a commitment to 40% of the benefits of investments in clean energy going directly to the communities that have borne the brunt of fossil fuel infrastructure. Under the plan that I wrote and that we rolled out, 50% of those benefits would go to environmental justice communities in Massachusetts. And environmental justice issues are not an abstract to me. I grew up in the shadows of the GE plant. I had friends and family members who had their backyards dug up because they had chemical pollution in them. So environmental justice is not a theory, it is something real, and I have seen the impacts of it. The second policy plan that we rolled out is our first economic equity plan. It's the first of multiple plans that we'll roll out on this front with targeted policies aimed at eliminating child poverty in Massachusetts by 2030, eliminating child hunger in Massachusetts by 2030, and cutting those overall rates in half in the same time frame. We would do that by increasing the earned income tax credit significantly, by increasing the state child tax credit match on the income side, on the hunger, and there's multiple other steps there. Again, I'll drop the links in. On hunger, we would increase the investment in the Mass Emergency Food Assistance Program. And if the federal government walks away from universal school meals, and I hope they will not, but if they do, we will step up and make that investment because Massachusetts has seen a greater increase in food insecurity and hunger than any state in the nation. And that's even with universal school meals. We need to step in and the state can make that investment. So those are some ideas and happy to talk about more, but I'm happy to exchange them over email. I don't want to eat up all the time on any one question here, but I appreciate the question, Andy.
Thank you. Stacy, do you have a question for Ben?
Yeah, I want to say first, thank you for coming and talking to us. I wanted to know what your position was on qualified immunity and on police and justice in general.
Yes, really appreciate the question, Stacy. I think qualified immunity should be ended outright. I support the legislation at the federal level. I would support that action at the state level. We are at the early stages in the campaign of forming our criminal justice policy and platform and plan. I'm spending a lot of time listening with advocates who have been working on the ground in communities, dealing with significant challenges around public safety, negative interactions between law enforcement and our Black and Brown communities. And so listening on the front end and then using that listening to help to build out our policy moving forward. So I think that's one step that we took a minor step on in the policing legislation that was signed into law. And I think we ought to take a larger step than where we are right now and join with states like New Mexico and others that have banned it outright.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John Dennehy, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. Senator, thank you so much for joining us tonight. My question is about Governor Baker. He's been very successful at getting Democratic votes. How do we get those Democrats back? Not just moderates, but even some progressives I've seen over recent years. Very likable fellow, but his policies are not policies that the Democratic Party embrace. How do we get them back?
So first, John, and I love this question, it's critically important. First, we got to stop making mistakes. And the mistakes that we've made in 2014 and in 2018 were to try to compare and connect Governor Baker to national Republicans. We looked at the R after the name and we said, Donald Trump's really unpopular, Mitch McConnell's really unpopular. We'll just tell folks he's one of them and he should be really unpopular as well. Charlie Baker is a lot of things. Charlie Baker is not a national Republican, right? He is far better than Donald Trump. He's far better than Mitch McConnell. That's a low bar to cross for the record, but he has certainly crossed that. And I think if we do that, voters look at it and they just dismiss any argument we make after the fact outright because they say, well, they're not serious. They're trying to compare him to them and he's not one of them, right? So first, stop digging the hole, stop making the mistake. Once we have done that, put forward a clear agenda, a clear case for what a Democratic administration would look like. That is what I am starting to do and plan to do on these policy action plans. We plan that we'll have somewhere in the order of 11 or 12 of those. So move forward with the policy and then, right, and then we have to build trust with voters. I think where Democrats have misunderstood the debate that happens in the gubernatorial races, it's different than a state rep race, a state senate race, a race for Congress, or the United States Senate. Those races are about, does a candidate share my values? And they're decided on that question alone. But a race for governor is not only does the candidate share my values, but can I trust this candidate? And in particular, for a Democratic candidate, can I trust this candidate to stand up for me, even when that means disagreeing with their colleagues? And I have a track record, yes, of being a progressive in the legislature, but also of being an independent in the legislature. I have voted for and advocated for an independent redistricting commission, even though that was a minority position while I was in the legislature, because I think voters should get to choose who represents them and not the other way around. And I think being clear about positions that are in the best interest of the public, even when they may put our candidates, put ourselves at odds with members of our own party, helps us build trust and helps us have a more honest debate about how we build that fairer, stronger Massachusetts. You also do it in how you fund and run the campaign. So I am not taking donations from lobbyists. I am not taking donations from PACs. And so even for those moderate or progressive voters who have voted for Charlie Baker, or for independent or unenrolled voters who might normally go and vote for Governor Baker, I want them to know if we have a disagreement on policy, it's not going to be because somebody threw me a fundraiser and whispered in my ear. It's going to be because it was an honest disagreement about the facts and about the issue and about how we're actually trying to solve that issue. And I think that is how you build trust, and that's how you win some of those voters back and over. And then finally, it's just by working hard. That's when I got into that race in 52 communities in Western Mass. I was told again and again, yeah, nice of you, 24-year-old running for the state Senate, maybe you'll have a chance someday off in the future. We outworked every other candidate. We've got to outwork every other campaign in this race if we're going to win, and have those conversations across 351 cities and towns multiple times, not just run a glitzy ad at the end of the campaign, but get there, listen, and learn. I want you all to be sick of me by November of next year in the best way possible. So I think that's how we do it, John.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a question for Ben?
I'm seeing John Thompson raise his hand.
Okay. John, do you have a question? John,
you're on mute.
let me see if I can find him here. I'll unmute him.
The campaign with that topic. But the other thing is affordable housing. We were taking pride a couple of weeks ago that we did not lose a member of the House of Representatives because our population increased. But when you see in the Patriot Ledger that Norwell prevented affordable housing in its town, and some of the decision in Braintree affecting affordable housing, where you question, do they want it? How are you going to continue increasing population without having affordable housing?
That's a great point, John. I mean, the honest answer is that we can't, and this is tied to our economic health and well-being. It's tied to climate as well, right? We need to be building more affordable housing. We need to be building more housing generally. We need to be building more affordable housing specifically, and we've got to be building it in particular around transit hubs so that our development patterns, so that commuting patterns are not entirely reliant on single passenger vehicle trips. So we need to make it so that transit is easy for people to use and it connects them directly to economic opportunities. And that's got to be true at the eastern end of the state. It's just as true at the western end of the state. Interestingly enough, there hasn't been as much of a housing crisis until the last 18 to 24 months, where you've seen more and more people trying to move into Western Massachusetts. And they have realized that the lack of housing starts for the better part of the last decade has put a huge crunch on affordable housing, on workforce housing out there as well. So we have a statewide problem. It needs to be by right, or at the very least, much easier to build multifamily housing around transit hubs and in the 1 mile radius around transit hubs to start. And we can continue to take steps above and beyond that from there. And whether that is eliminating in certain zones single family homes so that we can continue to make it easier to build more of that multifamily housing, I'm open to multiple pathways to get there, but you're absolutely right. It's a centerpiece of the agenda because you can't be serious about solving climate unless people can live near transit hubs. And you also can't be serious about continuing to grow as an economy if people can't afford to live here. And that's what we're experiencing right now.
Thank you. Ann Leland has her hand up.
There we go. So Ben, I will echo everybody else and say we're glad you're here and explaining your positions to us. Just kind of a weird question, I suppose, which is there have been a lot of other names bandied about as potential candidates for the Democratic gubernatorial spot. And good, bad, or ugly, part of campaigning is money. So I'm curious to know, if, for example, in the primary, just obviously completely hypothetical, if you were campaigning against, either a Mar Healey or a Joe Kennedy or whoever, anybody else that had perhaps more name recognition and perhaps more money, how, I mean, you sound like a great candidate. So the question is, how do we get you on an even playing field so that your voice can be heard? How can we level the playing field, so to speak, to make your voice heard?
Yeah, appreciate the question, Ann. A couple of things. One, that's part of getting in early, right?
Yep.
Part of getting in early is, one of the resources I can donate to the campaign, as it were, is my time, right? And it's a sacrifice, but it's one I'm willing to make and one that I think is critically important. And we're going to go out there. We're going to take the time to have conversations like these across the state. This is, I think, the 37th ward or town Democratic Committee meeting that I've spoken at already, along with another 20 or so meet and greets that we've done, 2 campaign feedback hubs that we've already hosted. So continuing to meet voters wherever and whenever we can. In my first campaign, although it was 15 years ago at this point, I had the same questions at the beginning then. How are you going to be able to raise the money? There was a 10-term former state representative who was endorsed by everyone. I mean, there were qualified women candidates in that race, and he got the endorsement of the National Organization for Women. I had to check with my mother every morning to make sure she wasn't going to issue a press release and endorse him. And there were a couple of days there she wasn't too thrilled with me, but she never did, right? And so I think part of it is just getting out there and working in. And I will admit to this, I'm on the phone 3 to 4 hours a day, doing fundraising all day, every day. And those conversations are going well. Am I ever going to raise the most of any candidate? I don't expect so. But I do know, again, we're not going to take a donation from a lobbyist. We're not going to take a donation from a PAC. And to John's earlier question about how you win, in particular, if you're up against a Charlie Baker, it's by being able to earn trust with voters as well. So I don't know that there is a magic wand or a simple answer to it, other than and beyond that. I know that no one is going to work harder than me. We're going to get out there and listen, and we're going to build a campaign the only way I know how to, which is grassroots. And a lot of folks say 351 cities and towns. I've represented 52 of them already, right? Like, so I got, like, I'm just down to, I'm not a math major here, but about 299 I really got to work in, right? And then we'll go from there.
Have you got any endorsements from organizations yet, like any of the environmental places or any of that sort of thing?
No, and they'll all hold off, really until next
Right.
calendar year. But we've had those conversations with folks from, Sunrise to ELM, where I was on the board of before. And certainly, consider those groups allies. And quite frankly, the names that you mentioned before, those are friends. I want to have a big, open, robust debate. The worst thing the Democratic Party can do is to let a few folks in the party somewhere think that they know who is going to be the best candidate for the party. That's never worked for us. What has worked is big, open, honest debates about how we build a fairer, stronger Massachusetts. That's why I'm in it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We have Andy has another question. Andy?
I appreciate the opportunity to ask a second question. Affordable housing is a big issue on this committee and for me personally. And I've been involved in some efforts locally, unfortunately without positive results so far, to get more political leadership here in town to support affordable housing. Here in the town of Braintree, I can tell you that the current administration has imposed a moratorium on new rental housing development in town.
Mhm.
All the developers know that. And one of the developers stated that explicitly in a planning discussion for development that's currently under review here. So he's going with a condo over 55 development instead. Governor Baker signed legislation that actually, in my view, you can comment on this, in my view, is actually seems like a stronger version of Chapter 40R, where it's more explicit about cities and towns' eligibility for specific state funds relative to their development of affordable housing. What would you do in addition to that to get towns like Braintree to come over to the idea of more affordable housing development?
Yeah, really do appreciate the question, Andy. And you'll notice in my opening remarks, one of the issues I didn't reference, Andy, was housing, because I believe that's actually one of the few examples where Governor Baker has used some of his political capital on the housing choices legislation. So I think he deserves credit there, right? Like I'm gonna call it the way I see it. I know every word I utter will be political for the next year and a half. I know that's unavoidable to some degree. But I do think that is one clearly where Governor Baker deserves credit for having used his political capital to get that piece of legislation signed into law. I do think there are more steps that we could take. I think where Governor Baker has played the game with one hand tied behind his back is by not making the investments that we need to make in affordable housing. The state doesn't have all the tools it can use to help not only push cities and towns who might otherwise be hesitant, but also to dangle a carrot out there to have more by way of incentives, more by way of support for those projects to move them along. So I think it's got to be a mix of both the carrot and stick approach. And again, where the state has resources and assets, in particular like our transit hubs, those have to be areas where we effectively don't accept arguments for why you can't build more housing around that. Those are the specific areas we've got to be doing. So from my perspective, again, small steps in that legislation that said if you've got one transit hub within a mile, that's got to be, it ought to be at every last one of those, and we can do a heck of a lot more. Appreciate the question though, Andy.
I would like to ask a question regarding the Weymouth compressor station, which is, of course, a huge issue, especially for us who live in East Braintree. It has been an ongoing fight for the last 6 years, which Governor Baker has not been an ally in that. So I wonder if you could address what's going on with this Weymouth compressor station.
So I think generally, Kathleen, first, as a principle, I don't think that you can be serious about climate change and then permit or allow the extension of fossil fuel infrastructure. You're either trying to limit the amount of fossil fuel infrastructure and fossil fuels that we use, or you're not. There's no in between, given the amount of time that we have left to address the worst impacts of climate change, right? So I think that is the underlying frustration, the underlying shortcoming of the administration's approach on Weymouth. It was for a long time the underlying shortcomings of their approach on the Springfield biomass plant, and certainly there are other examples as well. The Wheelabrator just up the road from me here in Saugus, multiple others. So what I would have done as governor is use every tool in our regulatory proceedings within our power to not allow the compressor station to move forward. again, either you're serious about climate change or you're not. And I think one of the frustrating things here again is that the administration tried to look at this project in a bubble and to not consider the impacts that the surrounding community the surrounding communities in Braintree and Weymouth had already felt, the longstanding environmental injustices in that community, the heightened asthma rates and others based on the existing infrastructure that was already there. So it didn't take into account the cumulative impact of the project and the long-standing impacts that had already been felt in that community. And so I have been, quite frankly, inspired by the organizing work, disappointed that folks even have to spend their time and energy there, but inspired by the organizing work that has gone on there. Have talked with some of the folks, Alice and others that have been directly involved, and am excited now that I am 2 shots through my regimen to get down there very soon and walk with folks and be with folks. I want to stand out soon. And fingers crossed and God willing, long before I am ever sworn into office, that project dies the death it deserves. But if it doesn't, you have my commitment. I will do everything in my power to see fit that it does, starting whenever I am sworn in January of 2023.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate very much your coming in and speaking to us tonight. If you would like to, you put your email in the chat. If you would like to put some other links in the chat, that would be great. And we wish you the best of luck and hope to hear more about your policies and programs in the future. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, everyone. And